Hello and welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and as is tradition on Wednesdays, I have with me
DCN and JOC editor Lindsey Cole.
And oh boy, Lindsey, for once the West is dominating things with our news. So why don't we start there for a change? And because my word, there's a lot of news coming out of here. So why don't you start with that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's no shock. Everybody who's following anything in the news these days is going to see that the fires are dominating the headlines out west, and it's no different for us. They're dominating our headlines to some extent for the JOC. So we're currently working on it. It's a very fluid situation, but as it sits right now, thankfully in West Kelowna, some major infrastructure was saved from the wildfire. So that directly relates to our industry because there was a $75 million water treatment plant that is pretty much done.
And it's their biggest infrastructure project ever.
Yeah, which is kind of a big deal. And obviously they were worried about the fire and the potential of it being destroyed. It's still standing. Everything is okay. The fire crews were able to ward it off. And then other, infrastructure that's pretty critical, fire hall, a school, the chlorinator, and a dam, were all able to be saved as well. So as much as this is a very fluid situation, and unfortunately other structures have been damaged, those major pieces of critical infrastructure were able to be, protected, which is pretty interesting. Unfortunately, as I said, fire crews are currently, and they expect the number to rise even still, but they're saying that 60 buildings have been lost. Obviously mostly residential structures, but nonetheless, still on very unfortunate situations. So we're currently, we're reporting on how the infrastructure is being impacted, but I think you guys can expect in the coming weeks and months that we'll be tapping our industry sources for what the rebuild is going to look like, as well as what might be needed for further protective measures. It's all kind of going hand in hand with similar to what we did when the major flooding happened in BC. What's going to need to be repaired, and not different to what you and I did in Fort Mac when we went there after the major fires there. So it's an extremely, and I don't want to discount, and I should say we shouldn't discount what's happening in the Northwest Territories either, or across Canada, but obviously in the Northwest Territories, it's fairly significant too. And we do have staff working on potential construction angles there, especially given that there's only one road in and one road out. Does this change things down the line? Where are things going to be going? So definitely anticipate some more coverage from that.
And what's weird is we saw this at Fort Mac, how unpredictable it is, like flying in or even going around different neighborhoods. You'd see houses that were untouched, and then right next to it would be an entire lot burned down. And then neighborhoods like that too, neighborhoods that were just fine. And then another one was, you'd see literally melted gas station signs. It was crazy. And I'm assuming the same kind of thing is at play in Kelowna, for instance.
I would assume, yeah. Even you see the pictures and the video of the raging flames and the photos, but then it's the aftermath that's always so perplexing to see, because it's like fire literally does have a path that can, wipe everything out or just be very specific. So
and it's just weird. I'm sure there's science behind it, but I don't understand it. So
yeah, me either. And it's very eerie too. When we were in Fort Mac and had to see that, it was very eerie and obviously unfortunate for those impacted. So kind of staying along the idea of climate change and things that are impacting communities and major infrastructure projects across the country, but in BC, we have it's not a feature story, but we have an in-depth story on the John Hart Dam seismic upgrades. This is a fairly large project for a dam that was built in the 1940s. The amount of material that's being moved and worked with could fill about 300 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So it's a lot of work being done to try to, make sure and ensure it's seismically safe. So apparently the upgrade work is going to enable it to withstand a 1 in 10,000 year earthquake. So pretty cool. And it also is part of a larger infrastructure project that is also pertains to the Strathcona Dam, the Ladcore Spillway, and the Campbell River system. So pretty good. Grant Cameron, one of our freelancers, did a good in-depth story on what the project entails and what's involved in the work. But it just kind of speaks to the fact that planning is kind of key for these initiatives. And, climate resilience is top of mind, even as we go through some fairly major disasters. So I'm sure, stemming from the wildfires and the flooding that we've seen, that there will be further measures to try to prevent this, or try to reduce anyway the amount of damage that's caused in the future. So yeah, that's basically what's on deck and what is happening out west. So it's fairly fluid situation, if you will. But
no kidding.
Yeah. And then out east, I would say housing is the term of the week. Affordability, housing measures, and the like, which probably comes as zero shock to anyone.
No.
So right now, some bigger ticket items that have been coming out of story pitches and etc. to me. The Association of Municipalities of Ontario's conference is being hosted as we speak. Don Wall is there attending for us, but it's been kind of a treasure trove of news, if you will. For example, yesterday, and I don't think it's a coincidence, Ontario Premier Doug Ford unveiled more strong mayor powers to 21 more municipalities. And he also happened to announce 1.2 billion in incentives for cities and towns, municipalities, obviously, to meet housing targets. Obviously, he's strategic in where he does his announcements. So this is coming on the heels of the Greenbelt Auditor General's report. So he hasn't exactly received the most positive news. Or positive views in the news, for lack of a better term. So this was kind of a good news announcement for him, I guess, about what he can do to help bolster housing in these municipalities and meet the targets that the province has set. Don, as I said, is attending today and will probably be focusing more on housing initiatives and what's working, what isn't, from the perspective of municipalities. So that will be kind of a different angle for us, which is out of the horse's mouth, So that will be good. Then we also had a story out this week that we profiled Toronto's new planning chair. Gord Perks is his name. So he is on the chairing the Planning and Housing Committee. And he actually kind of pointed to an interesting way of looking at things, saying that Ontario's Bill 23, the More Homes Built Faster Act, which is supposed to streamline decision making and make things quickly, may actually be having a little bit of the opposite effect. So he says that there's probably a happy medium to be had. And Toronto's obviously at the forefront of trying to do some more affordable housing. He's going to be working directly with the new mayor, Olivia Chow, to try to figure out how best to develop housing and in an affordable fashion that meets some of the election campaign's promises that were stated. So good profile story on him, kind of a different angle for us, fairly specific to Toronto, but interesting nonetheless. And then kind of changing directions, albeit a challenge nonetheless. We had a new survey, a story by Angela about a survey that's covered the US and Canada, but it was called Building Better, a Women in Construction Study. And about 770 women were surveyed. And what I think is really interesting about it is, and the hook of the story is, sponsorship, not mentorship, could be the answer to bringing more women and advancing women in particular in construction. So you might ask yourself, well, what does that mean? Because I did when I was reading it. Essentially, there's a lot of talk about mentorship, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with mentorship. So please don't think that I'm saying that. But a sponsorship type of role is somebody that might bring you into a big meeting or advocate for you on a bigger project if you're not in the room. They might challenge you directly with something a little bit more. that's what the survey respondents are really, and what kind of the key takeaway of the story is. Women do want to advance their career in construction, but they want to be able to do so with like almost tangible action items, if you will.
Right.
Um, Not to say that the advice that they get is not great, but it's shifting a mindset from preparing a woman for an opportunity to giving her that opportunity.
Hmm.
Um, so it was an interesting. The survey results were interesting, and I think it speaks to maybe another area of focus to increasing women in construction. So definitely give that a read if you have a chance. And as always, you can check out our newsletters that come out every Wednesday um, at dailycommercialnews.com/newsletters. And yeah, you can subscribe and get all your news that I pretty much just talked about in one spot.
Great. And up next, you recall last week we had an interview about U.S. immigration with Kip Eidelberg. Now this week we have the somewhat different Canadian immigration situation for as it pertains to skilled trades with CBTU's president, Sean Strickland. Last week, we interviewed Kip Eidelberg from AEM about the American immigration situation, and he had some fairly pointed things to say about that. And now we're going to get the Canadian side of things, which is much different, I gather. Sean, let's start with that. If you kind of give a summary of how the two systems differ and how ours might be to an advantage in terms of getting workers into construction?
Well, we've certainly had a long history of immigration into Canada, and in the U.S. similarly, but in the most recent history, the U.S. has had some real challenges with their immigration system and don't nearly bring in as many as they had previously. I think it's largely due to their real challenges with undocumented workers and mostly from Mexico and Central America coming up through into the U.S. So their challenges are much more different than ours. We have committed through the federal government and the Minister of Immigration, Sean Fraser, recently, he's now switched portfolios, of course, but committed to 500,000 new immigrants a year over the next 5 years. And last year, we actually brought in almost 1 million immigrants. So that's just through the regular immigration stream and does not include immigrants that come in on a temporary basis to the temporary foreign worker program. So we have well-established practices on attracting workers from overseas and getting them into Canada to go to work.
Mm-hmm. And what are some examples of that we've used recently and sort of traditionally, I guess? Because I know Toronto, for instance, is kind of founded. It was built by immigrants, essentially. I mean, many places were, but Toronto in particular, you can tell that multiple generations of immigrants built that city to what it is now.
Well, for the construction industry, we still have some real challenges. Up until recently, it was very difficult for a skilled trades construction worker to immigrate to Canada because they just didn't qualify under a very rigorous point system, and the immigration system was more looking at attracting more educated workers in terms of post-secondary education, more professional workers, and also an entrepreneurial class. So workers coming to Canada that had a fairly substantial and hefty bank accounts. But due to lobbying from the industry, the government is beginning to recognize we have skilled labor shortages in a variety of areas, and not all areas, but across Canada and in certain trades, but not all trades. And so the government and the provincial governments in partnership have put into place robust immigration programs to attract skilled construction trades workers from overseas. And that's predominantly through the express entry system. And the specific program within the express entry system is a federal skilled trades program through express entry. And they have a certain amount of requirements there in order for that person to be able to immigrate to Canada and go to work. But that has had some success just in the last year. Like, this is late breaking news. Just in the last year in Ontario, for example, I think they were able to get 1,600 of these trades workers in from overseas last year. And I would suggest that number is going to grow over the next 3 to 5 years.
What are some areas where there workers, not just immigrants, but presumably like people who traditionally haven't been part of the construction industry, try to get those people in too? But what are some areas that they're most needed? And conversely, if you're an immigrant looking to go over here, you've got certain set of desires, and where do you want to work? Where are the immigrants saying they want to go to?
Well, I mean, that's part of the challenge of the program is that there's certain requirements on port of entry and the obligation of you can't get in unless you have a job offer.
Mhm.
And so when you have a job offer, that means that you have to go wherever that job is. And so the government's trying to focus and match those skilled trades shortages up with potential new immigrants from overseas. And so one of the challenges we have as a unionized construction industry is that it has to be a job offer from an employer. And we're lobbying that unions could be considered a job offer because we have demand for laborers, for example. In Ontario, there's upwards of 20,000 laborers that required, carpenters, drywallers. We have requirements for welders right across the country, a variety of trades and varieties of different areas. And it would be really good for us and for the construction industry as a whole if a union membership could qualify equally as a job offer, because the unions, a unionized construction sector, we have 197 training centers, almost 200 training centers right across the country, where we're able to train workers, we're able to offer English as a second language, we're able to improve their skills, we're able to make them job ready, and we're also able to protect them from exploitation. And many of our unions, not all, but many of our unions would be interested in being able to sponsor immigrants so we can get them over and get them in the union halls and supply our unionized contractors with these skilled tradespeople.
And how do you square the circle of affordable housing is quite possibly the biggest political issue we have right now. And so one of the ways to solve that theoretically is to bring more people over to build stuff. Having said that, you got to put those guys somewhere. So how do you square that circle? Like how do you, I know that's a big ask from me to give to you, but.
No, but that certainly is a challenge. And I've been asked before about the ambitious housing plans we have to, bring 1.5 million new houses, I think just in the province of Ontario. And I think it's like double that for Canada. And we need more housing stock. There's no doubt about it. But we also need people to build that housing stock. And we also need people who are skilled to build it and people who get paid a requisite wage and an appropriate wage. And from our perspective, the union wage is the gold standard for wages and benefits in the industry. And so I think it is, you're right, Warren, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg environment, but we're not going to be able to solve the affordable housing challenge unless we build more housing. And so we need workers to build more housing and help catch up the marketplace, because once we get the workers into place and we're able to build housing, we can build housing pretty quickly. There's also new approaches to construction in terms of modular. We need to increase our zoning requirements. And so not only build new housing stock in greenfield, but increase densities in existing neighborhoods, which is a little bit more politically challenging to deal with. But the first key to solving the housing crisis is we need workers to build housing.
And just out of curiosity and anecdotally, I guess, how many immigrants do you see coming here to become Canadian citizens or to live here long term? And how many people do you see coming in and going, okay, I'm doing this job, and I'm going right back home? Like, or is that a measurable phenomenon?
Well, I'm not an expert on this, but if you commit to immigrating to Canada, you're on a work permit and you're on a pathway to citizenship. So I think when you make that commitment to immigrate, much different than temporary foreign worker, when you make that commitment to immigrate to Canada and you have that job offer and you meet the requirements, I think the retention rate of those folks becoming Canadian citizens staying in Canada is pretty high. The challenge we have is that the abundant use of temporary foreign worker programs where companies basically borrow labor from overseas and those workers come in on a work permit anywhere from 6 to 12 months, and then once that work permit's finished, they go back to their home country. And during that process, there is challenges with worker exploitation, the amount of money that temporary foreign workers is paid on an hourly basis. There's been research demonstrating that actually suppresses Canadian wages, and also the working and living conditions of temporary foreign workers are well documented in the agricultural sector, where they are not ideal and certainly below par for what Canadians would expect to deal with in a living and working condition environment. And so the temporary foreign worker program is a completely different animal. We think there needs to be some major reforms to the temporary foreign worker program in order to make it work better for Canada and make it work better for all workers.
And I've been covering this for about 12 years now, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but the temporary foreign worker program at the time, let's say 10 years ago, was sort of touted as a solution to this problem in a way. But has it turned into more of a Band-Aid, or?
Well, certainly is a Band-Aid, and the challenge is because we've been using the temporary foreign worker program, like you referenced, for a number of years, and during high demand seasons and high demand peaks for construction services, but we haven't been able to develop a sustainable approach to meeting our labor market demands domestically. And so now we're in a situation where we really need to do a catch up on getting more Canadians into the skilled trades, and also looking at immigration. And it's important to also recognize, Warren, that the construction industry, like all construction industry, according to Stats Canada, union and non-union, and union has a lot of history in this area in terms of our commitment to apprenticeship. But the entire industry, according to Stats Canada, we bring in about 100,000 apprentices a year into the construction industry. And you think that's a pretty good number. Well, it is a pretty good number, but that is just enough to keep pace with the retirements. And so our demographic is quite old, and we're bringing in new apprentices, but it's only enough to replace the workers that are retiring. During COVID, we lost 55,000 workers across Canada who weren't retirement age, but just decided to retire early. Didn't want to go back to the construction site. And so despite all the efforts we're doing and the great job we're doing in bringing more people into the industry, we're just keeping pace with retirements. And we look at the economic opportunities ahead of us right across Canada as we develop new electricity programs, nuclear SMRs, hydrogen carbon sequestration. We got the renaissance of manufacturing in Ontario and in Quebec, and mining activities. You overlay all that work ahead of us, we're going to need to do more than bring in the 100,000 apprentices we do organically. We're going to need immigration to help. Temporary foreign workers isn't the way to do it because it's not sustainable. You're only borrowing that labor for a certain period of time. And we think that temporary foreign workers, you'd have an opportunity for unions, not all unions, and in some areas and not all areas, but for those unions where it makes sense to sponsor the temporary foreign workers in cooperation with their employers, get those temporary foreign workers into the union halls, get them trained, help with English as a second language, protect them from exploitation, and provide a pathway to citizenship for those that are interested. That's a way in which we can leverage temporary foreign workers to better meet the labor market demands of Canada on a long-term basis.
Now, I know Canada semi-recently has started to say, when you see American people emigrating to America and their H-1B runs out, for instance, and Canada's got express entry for them in certain cases, because construction's gotten a little more high-tech in the last 15, 20 years than it was before. Do you see any of that streaming into construction yet, or is that just kind of an isolated thing?
Well, we're working with the U.S. It's interesting you raise that. In the mid-2000s, when our oil industry was quite robust and there was lots of investment happening, the number one country of origin for temporary foreign workers was actually U.S. And the U.S. continues to be, in the oil patch, a target market for maintenance and turnaround projects. So we've been working with the U.S. It's much easier for U.S. workers to come into Canada through our various programs, going back to how this conversation kicked off, than it is for Canadians to go into the U.S. And so we're working with the U.S. to increase the number of entrants they allow under the H-1B program, and also specifically to target construction workers. And we're hoping to get some positive results on that in the next 6 to 8 months.
And I guess finally, I would ask if you're a big firm or a small firm and you're looking to use foreign workers and presumably, as permanent residents eventually, how would you go about that? What's sort of the path to do that?
Well, you'd have to go to Immigration Canada website. They have application forms there. You have to get a labor market impact assessment to indicate that there is a shortage of workers that you're looking for in your particular area, and then put in the application and see what happens. So we also believe that for that LMIA, the labor market impact assessment, that unions, a long time ago, unions, and I remember back in the day when I was working for a local building trades council, the local employment insurance, ESDC now, would phone us and say, hey, look, we got this application for temporary foreign workers. Does this make sense? What is the employment picture like for your union halls and in your community? And I think needs to be more discussion around that. I mean, not all employers, certainly who use a temporary foreign worker program, are exploitive in nature, but some are. And if they can get away with paying workers less than the Canadian requirement, or sometimes less than minimum wage when they dock off room and board and all kinds of other things, that creates a real problem in the temporary foreign worker space. And so I think it's important that we look at ways in which we can improve that process. And one of them is through some more dialogue on the labor market impact assessment to get a more clear picture of what the labor market requirements are in certain zones where these applications are being made.
Okay, great. Thanks for joining us today, Sean.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Warren, anytime.
And that's it for this episode of the Construction Record Podcast. Make sure to check us out this Friday when we have our latest economic discussion with Chief Economist Alex Carrick and Senior Economist Michael Gooks about interest rates, construction, and conversion to a no and low carbon economy. You can hear us on Apple Music, Amazon Music, and Spotify, as well as on the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce websites. Thanks again for listening.